People for that.
Okay.
How does it catch the mink again?
You guys,
Oh,
Wait, did you say YouTube?
$200.
we're gonna
It's okay,
start.
I've spent that much
Is it
on
really?
poison as well, so.
We're doing YouTube?
For the beginning, and then.
Welcome to the Centerville City Council emergency meeting being held March 15th, 2020 at 11 a.m. at City Hall. Let's make sure that we can conduct business by doing a roll call.
Meekum here?
Ivy here.
Ian's here.
Tammy, you're between me and the mayor.
Oh, good to know. Fillmore here.
McEwen here.
The note that all 5 council members are present in one form or another. The reason we have called this meeting today is obviously because of the COVID-19 situation. We have a couple of things that have come up that one of the council people wanted to inform us of, and we want to also inform everybody of the hard work that some of our staff's been putting in as well too. Over the course of this last week, of course, we know that the governor came out on Thursday, and he instituted some measures, many of which, are no meetings of more than 100, meetings with 20 or less, so that have people over 60, to not hold those as well too. So we've had throughout our community some things taking place. I was on a call between 4 and 5 on Thursday with the Centerpoint Theater, and of course, we probably all know that they have discontinued their performances starting. Actually, they had a new run starting on Friday night, and that's discontinued until the 2-week period that the governor said to reevaluate at that point in time. So that's not taking place. The staff has met, and I've met with the staff 2 or 3 times. The chief and his staff has been working very hard. He's been in some meetings in Box Elder County, and has put together an excellent response plan that's in draft mode right now that we were going to bring before the council on Tuesday, but we will bring it before the council today as far as something that would be our Centerville City plan for infectious disease spread. Unfortunately, Councilwoman Fillmore, you probably don't have this in front. No, you do have it in front of you. If you look at your Tuesday meeting, that plan is in there in that packet. Okay, so
I read over that.
Okay, so you will have it in front of you. So with
Mayor,
that,
Mayor, just as a note, the Centerville Library has also closed. They are going to be closed from Monday through Wednesday. They have limited hours on Thursday. Patrons will not be allowed to browse the stacks. They're only going to fulfill holds that have been put in over the phone. And then they're going to reevaluate as to what their schedule is going to be going forward.
great.
Is that a Davis County?
That's Davis
direction?
County-wide.
Because we are part, so it's county-wide.
Yes, countywide. All the libraries will operate under the same rules.
So with that said, thank you, Councilman. Unless there's any other measures that anybody wants to bring up that they know that taken place, I think that it's fair to turn it over to Chief and Alex, as they've been working hard on this, to kind of review over this plan. Like I said, they've worked hard on it. I met with the chief for 45 minutes on Thursday, and then the chief and I and Alex and Brant was on the phone, and Lisa met again with it on Friday to make some further modifications. But by and large, I think it's very well put together, and we just wanted to present it to you and run it by you. So thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Mayor, Council. So, as the Emergency Management Director for the city, and having the responsibility to do planning and so forth for events, a pandemic has been on my mind for probably 10 years, and we kind of had a little bit of a start on it many years ago, and then it kind of went by the wayside as we kind of prioritized other things. And in the last 5 years or so, we keep a 3-year planning calendar for our emergency management planning and what we're going to do, what we're going to emphasize in the coming years. Of course, earthquake has been on there several times. We've had fire that has come up, and again, you know, with last year, and every year we get fires, so that always is something that we worry about. Winter storms, hazmat situations, we've had hazmat as a theme. We've had shelter in place as a theme. So we've had these different themes, and we've plugged in pandemic into our 3-year calendars, but it keeps getting pushed back because as the Emergency Management Committee, in consultation with Steve Thacker at the time, we felt like, okay, well, maybe this isn't so important, we need to push it back. And I think that's kind of been the trend for a lot of emergency managers around the state, because there are so many other issues and things that we're dealing with, and they're in our face all the time. But in the back of my mind, I've always known, in fact, when we met to determine the next set of calendaring that we were going to do, pandemic was put on the calendar. Was it next year? I think we were planning on doing that in our next year calendar. So we had this, and it's been on my mind, it's been on our mind. So here we are, we're in a pandemic. So now it's front and stage, and we've got to rev this up really fast. So we didn't have an infectious disease or pandemic plan per se in effect, other than just our basic EOP giving us more or less guidelines. And if you recall, if we kind of think back about how this sort of developed, and I wish I haven't had time, and it's been an extremely busy week for me. I've had a personnel issue that I've had to deal with that's consumed a lot of my time, and then of course all the other time that I had, pretty much I was focusing on this. But as we think back about what happened, and again, I don't have a timeline written down, but we started hearing about this situation in China first, a little over a month ago. And I think the world was kind of watching this and thinking, okay, well, hopefully they'll contain it, and whatever it is, and nobody knew, and there was a lot of information going out there, and there was information that, well, you know, it's really not that big of a deal. It's just the regular flu is a lot worse than this. And why are we worried about that? And so as time went on, things kind of stayed the way they were with China, and then pretty soon we started realizing that it was starting to move. Now, when I first heard about this, I became concerned that it wasn't going to be contained in China, but you know, hopefully that it would. And so it became a topic of discussion during our executive meetings, just within days of the very first indication of something going on in China with this. Of course, the WHO hadn't designated it as an infectious disease of international concern, and it was just kind of out there. And we've seen these come and go with the bird flu and some of the other things, and they've been handled, and it really hasn't had much of an effect on us. So as we've gotten more information, this is basically a somewhat slow motion train wreck that's getting worse and worse and quicker as we go on. So we're trying to adapt and figure out the best course of action. You may recall I sent an email out on the 4th of this month to the council members talking about what we were looking at, what our concerns were, trying to increase our supplies within city government, and giving some resources that were being developed at the time by CDC, trying to kind of get this in our minds a little bit and figuring out, you know, what's the best way for us to respond. So this isn't like a normal disaster where you have an earthquake or you have a big fire or you have something that just happens, and now we know, everybody knows we have an emergency. And that became a big question. So the governor declared emergency, and everybody, that kind of woke everybody up a little bit more. Of course, we had the situation with the jazz. So we had these benchmark incidents that were kind of going, wow, okay, well maybe we should take this a little more seriously. So last Wednesday, I attended a meeting, Alex and I attended a meeting in Box Elder County with the northern region, all of the emergency managers in the northern region that were able to attend. They weren't all there, but all of them that were pretty active in that northern region incident response team that has been put together. And so we've been going to those meetings for years, but we had a special meeting before the northern region incident response team meeting to kind of discuss COVID-19. And we were brought in on a conference call with the state and the state health department, and some of the things that they were doing and some of the guidelines that they were suggesting. And still it was a developing situation, and we still didn't have a lot of information. They were expressing concern. They were expressing, you know, we need to take this seriously. We need to get going on it. So after we had that conference call, we had a discussion among emergency managers. So you had Ogden, Box Elder, Rich County, Morgan, Davis. The other component that we had going on here in the last 4 months or so, the Davis County Emergency Management, it used to be Emergency Services coordinator or supervisor, I forget exactly what his title was. He retired. And we've had a vacuum there from the county. And they just barely hired a brand new person to be their emergency management director, and he has 0 emergency management experience. He's a retired police officer from California. So they hired him on. He's a civilian employee, which is good. In the past, we've had, in my opinion, that's good. In the past, we've had a deputy that's been assigned to that position. They work in that position for a couple of years or a few years, and then they reassign it to someone else, and someone else has to relearn everything, and there's a massive amount of information to learn. So now, at least we've got someone that is not going to be rotated around. They're going to be the emergency management director. It's Chad Monson. But he's brand new, and it's baptism by fire for him. It's the first time I met him. I didn't know who he was when he walked in the door at the meeting on Wednesday, and I was like, oh good, we got emergency management director from the county. So we've had a void there, and we've had a lack of information and continuity and stuff with the county because of that. And I have been asking the sheriff about it for months now. But so we had this discussion about, should we declare an emergency? And I think you all can sympathize with the concern of overreaction. So everybody knows what's been going on with the toilet paper to begin with. And you know, a lot of people were laughing about that, and to me it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be stacking up on toilet paper. But it was kind of a joke that was out there. But we were, as emergency managers, as we sat around the table, we were talking about what's the advantage of declaring a local disaster within each community, and what's the disadvantage. And during that meeting, there was a representative from the state there, and they said, the governor's declaration covers you guys. So you're falling under the declaration from the governor. Essentially, you've all been declared because the governor said so. And so I actually posed the question, can we confirm that? And I forget who it was. They contacted someone from the state by text. He says, yep, we're covered. So our discussion was, well, do we want to declare a disaster and increase the panic level or the anxiety level higher than it is now, or should we just go with what we got and just, you know, consider ourselves under emergency declaration? The consensus in the room was that's what we're going to do. And some very, very respectable emergency managers, highly respected by me and others that were in the room, said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to ask my commission. I'm not going to ask my council, my mayor, to declare an emergency. He says, I think it's just going to feed to the panic and the anxiety. I'm not going to do it. and others said, we're not going to do it. There was one from Rich County that was arguing to do it, and I expressed some of the reasons. Some of the reasons that were brought up is money. By making a local declared disaster, you may open up yourself or as a city organization or a county government, to obtain some funding, some federal funding, which is an issue, and it's true, but in this situation, with this being across the board, United States, honestly, I don't think there's going to be enough money to go around to make a whole lot of difference for every little community. So the other question is, well, by declaring a disaster, the advantage to that is allowing us to implement emergency procedures. So that's the advantage of having an emergency declaration, a local declaration. Now, since that meeting, we've been in meetings with Lisa, and we've been trying to dial in on that and figure out, are we covered by the state or not? And the language that they sent to us was very wishy-washy. It was like, yeah, you may be. So we got further direction. Brent reached out to the League of Cities, I believe, and basically they came back and said, in order for you to really impose your local restrictions and so forth, and to have some more flexibility, you probably ought to have a locally declared disaster or emergency. You can use those two synonymously almost. So I give you that background a little bit to kind of give you somewhat of a timeline of what we're dealing with. Now, as we started, things around the country started looking a little bit more serious, and the governor, I think it was when the governor declared an emergency, that's when I really went to work on developing a response plan, a response and mitigation plan. So I was furiously typing away. Alex was helping me. We were going to CDC. We were trying to find everything we could with the health department, resources, suggestions, and then thinking about our own individual circumstances and how that rubber can meet our road, those recommendations from the feds and from the state and so forth, how are we going to implement that for us? And so I just started writing that plan. It's not exactly how I like to write a regular plan. It's a lot of bullet points, but it was kind of fast and furious. So then we started to share this plan. Lisa was involved. Brant was involved. The mayor was involved. And then we got the department heads involved. And that's what we have before you today, is this draft plan with 4 different stages on it, basically 4 different activation levels. So the first thing I want to do here is kind of go through this plan that we have developed. Again, it's a draft plan. It hasn't been, it's not written in concrete. So, and it's designed to be a guideline for us in this outbreak. And there, on the very last sentence there, it says, since this, last sentence of the first paragraph, since this plan is designed to be only a guide, real-world situations may dictate deviations to this plan. And then I wanted to put this next paragraph in there because I think it's important. Centerville City is not the authority on infectious disease spread, methods for mitigation, or response to outbreaks. The city will defer to the state and county health officials for direction regarding these situations, but will be a resource to put into effect the recommendations given. We're not the experts, and we're looking for the health department to be the guide. Now, I've had Alex trying to get some contact with the health department, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit. Come on up here, because I'm not clear. Just indicate what we've done with the health department.
So I've contacted the health department on what information they want us to give to our community members. They just want us to share whatever they're putting out because they are the experts on this. I've shared this draft with the health department. As you can understand, they're a little busy right now, so they have not gotten back to me. But we are in contact with them, and they should be getting back to me.
Do you have a name who you're in contact, or are you just going through the
It's
incident command center?
Melton?
Ivy Milton Sales.
Yeah.
And I've been constantly texting with Brian Hatch from the county as well too.
Yeah.
Mainly taking the position that they're following the state right now, unless Chief, you've heard more, or Alex, you've
Yeah,
heard more,
so we've received very little instruction from the local county health department. Initially, they said, just tell people to get signed up on Code Red, which is great, and I think that's a good idea, and we got that message out on our Facebook, but to me, that wasn't super helpful. I was looking for a little more guidance from that, but so it's been a little hard, I think, from getting data out of them, other than share what we're doing, and I think most of the information that's coming out is either at the state level or the CDC.
Yeah, it's been really hard. I first contacted Brian Hatch a week ago Tuesday. And he says, we're not sure what quite to do with it right now. It's kind of like Cinderella or Goldilocks, which porridge do you choose?
Right. So we've been just trying to get the resources, the trusted resources where we can find them. The CDC's website has been down on a few times when I've gone on there. I'm sure there's lots of people getting on there and it's crashing it. But that's what we've been trying to do, is get some direction and some information, but in the meantime, deal with the situation at hand and build something that we feel would be beneficial to our community. Now, in the first part of this, the community spread of infectious disease. This is kind of short, because in many ways, this is not an earthquake, this is not a fire, this is not something where we're going to be sending lots of police cars and ambulances out all of a sudden to try to fix this problem. It is bigger than that, but it's also way different than that. And so we want to give information to the public. We want to take measures to decrease interactions that we're creating for them. So social distancing has been, you've probably heard that several times, and I'm glad to see some spaces here. Bryant, you're messing it up. The recommendation is 6 feet away from other people. That's from the CDC. So we want to try to figure out things that we can do as a city to be a resource and a help to our community. The list is a little bit short on that. And should they ever have a vaccine come available, we keep having to kick it down the road just a little bit, but we're working on getting an MOU in place for a location. We're looking at the library right now, basically the library city park parking lot down here on 4th West as a location for a pod or a point of distribution. Someplace we can have security and lighting and accessibility, and some place that everybody knows where it's at, that we can control. So,
What about the theater?
So the theater is another possibility. The problem that I have with the theater is that it's so big and there's so many different ways to come in at it. We have to look at it from a security point of view, because if people are trying to get in and get vaccine, we've got to have that's a secure area. And to me, it's like too accessible from too many different directions. So that's one thing that we're considering, is the security of a pod and where to put it. But those are kind of in the weeds decisions that need to be made. And the very last point there is reassure the public as practical to avoid panic. And I think that's a big part of our what we want to try to accomplish. So then the bulk of this plan has to do with how are we going to respond as a city. And so the first thing I tried to do, and of course it's not just me, this is an effort, a coordinated effort with department heads, Brant, Lisa, the mayor. The mayor's been involved with this as well. So What are our core, what things do we have to keep going that are just a must? And, you know, that's a list that are our critical services. You know, we got to keep our water system going. We got to keep our roads open and transportation systems working. We've got to be able to bury people or take care of that need. We've got to provide police services, and we've got to make sure our drainages aren't backing up. So those are systems that we control. Of course, you got sewer and other things, but, you know, I don't really foresee a problem that way, other than a big storm happens, and we just got to make sure that our drainage systems are going to handle that. Because life is going to go on, and we're going to still have our normal stuff that happens, and we may have a huge snowstorm, or we may have a huge storm, or we may have a fire, or whatever. So I kind of listed those. And then I wanted to go through and look at job functions and delineate job functions that would support those critical needs. So kind of went through there. And again, that was in consultation with department heads and boots on the ground. So in some of these cases, I would call David Stark and say, what do you do? And I would call some of the people that actually do the job and try to get their input on it. And then police services. Parks and or the Parks Department. So I wanted to try to look at the different departments to see what they do, and I think we need to add to, I just noticed this, I don't think we've got the court in here. And oh, okay, yeah. The court is another issue that we're trying to work our way through. And I kind of want to change the terminology too from essential to non-essential, because to me that creates a connotation that some people really aren't needed, which everybody's needed. But there are critical services that people are.
Just go to mission critical.
Mission critical, there you go, from our military. All right. So then I looked at, okay, what are the support staff that are needed to keep our mission critical staff moving? And went through that. And you can kind of see those bullet pointed down. And then important but non-essential city services, I put their court proceedings, park maintenance, so mowing the grass and things like that, recreation programs, planning and zoning, and various commissions and tasks. All right. So from there, I wanted to look at what kind of levels do we have of response and mitigation, and what are their trigger points. And so the first level is your basic, every year we get the flu coming around and we get the cold season. And it just kind of goes through that basic stuff, personal protective gear, keeping clean, staying home if you're sick. The trigger point on that I put as the normal flu and cold season. Lisa added on there, she wanted to add an authority, so a position authority that would activate that level, a person. So emergency manager is authorized to determine and designate level 1 incidents. So someone is designated, the onus is on you, you make this determination, level 1. So that's a low risk, considered low risk, even though we know the flu kills a lot of people. In fact, we've had 2 people in Centerville die from the flu, the regular flu this year. Level 2, moderate risk. So this is a new strain of potentially deadly flu or virus that has been detected anywhere in the world, and it is of international concern. That's kind of where we were when we started first hearing about this stuff from China, and then the WHO came out and said, hey, you know, this is kind of a big deal. So it hadn't really spread out of China at that point, but that to me was level 2 where, okay, we need to probably be paying attention to this. Implement the same procedures in level 1, but intensify it, and then start looking at our employees traveling out of the United States and vacation plans and things like that, and evaluating those and deciding You know, is there a concern here for allowing employees to going to various places in the world? Look at employee leave and employee travel restrictions and policies set forth. So maybe look at our policies, determine those city employees and officials who should receive priority for vaccines. So I had actually had this in a higher threat level. Alex suggested that really needs to be moved up into level 2, which, you know, when I looked at it and thought about it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense, because those are things we need to be thinking about. Okay, if they do come up with a vaccine, but it's limited supply, what's our who gets it first? Those are hard decisions to make. And then the trigger point, World Health Organization or US CDC declares a public health emergency. And we've had that already. Again, I don't have my timeline. I can't tell you when that happened, but the authorities, the emergency management director or emergency manager is authorized to determine and designate level 2 incidents. And that was something that was added by Lisa. Level 3, elevated risk, new strain of flu or virus has been known to be deadly and is spreading throughout the world. So now we know it's no longer being contained, it's starting to spread. And we've seen that. So there's these bullet points there to look at different things, you know, maybe counseling some meetings or starting to telecommunicate, looking at the CDC a little more heavily, looking at quarantining people that's been outside the area to maybe some of those risk areas, talk more about employee restrictions on travel, putting up signs around the office, which we've done. If you look around, there's signs around the office here for employees to make higher awareness, you know, wash your hands, don't spread germs, things like that. Stay home if you're sick. So trigger point, state of Utah declares state of emergency or a governmental health agency recommends heightened vigilance. And then the authority would be the city, or the emergency manager and city manager are authorized to determine and designate level 3 incidents. So Lisa felt like this was something where we need to have 2 people that are agreeing on this, that have some administrative authority, either by city code or by our emergency operation plan, which falls to the emergency management director. And then level 4, we're talking extreme risk. So my opinion, we're in level 4 right now. Deadly disease is spreading locally with higher risk of exposure and high mortality rates. So this is where we're ratcheting things up. Again, we're still using all those measures in the 3, 2, and 1, but intensifying those. So looking at reducing non-essential city services, council or suspend city-sponsored gatherings where the virus may spread, have all employees work from home if not required to physically be at work in the city, 14-day quarantine at home for employees who have been exposed without proper personnel, protective gear on, or preventative measures taken for those expressing symptoms. So it goes on and on and on. Social distancing, limiting of staff, providing VPN access to those who can work at home, or, you know, we're sending home to work. Hopefully they can still do something. Close our lobbies and walk-ins, use our phones more often, limit or have no in-person meetings like we're having right now. But let's see, I think when those have to happen, we need to spread them out. So people are, I've told Kimber, when you have your council meetings and meetings in this room, that if they still continue to, you still continue to have them here, to have chairs spaced 6 feet apart so that nobody's within 6 feet of another person when he sets up the room. A questionnaire for employees to determine if they are at higher risk for having the contagion or spreading the disease or spreading the disease. No visitors, and that doesn't mean people that don't work here coming in, but they just have to have a good, like they're performing some function in the city hall or in one of our buildings to help us keep things going. Minimize passing of papers, pens, use personal protective gear, handling of documents, increase social distancing, wash your hands, no shaking of hands, cough into your elbow. These are things that, the CDC is saying. Instead of, our employees often go to break at public locations, limit that or stop doing it. Going out to eat at a public restaurant of some sort while you're working. Those are just opportunities to get the virus. Monitor your own health. Don't come to work if you're sick. We talk in there a little bit about things you can do while you're at home. And then looking at our policies and employee travel restrictions. And then I went through, because I'm the police chief, and did some specific things for the police department that I already have implemented within my police department. I put some bullet points in there for public works, for court. I haven't had, this is a ongoing document that we're trying to get solidified. I want parks to give me some input on it. I want administration to give some input, court, public works. I want them to be figuring out some of this minutia for them. So the trigger point on this has to do with the mayor, and a lot of that has to do with state law and our emergency operation plan and how that's set up. So all recommendations in level 4 response will automatically be triggered in the event the mayor declares an infectious disease emergency or disaster. If the mayor activates a level 4 response without a declaration of emergency, so wanted to give the opportunity, because we were having that discussion, should we declare emergency or should we not? But have the option to still implement this without actually declaring an emergency. So I wanted to put that in there, that wording. Let's see, if the mayor activates a level 4 response without declaring an emergency, he/she may invoke all or some of the recommendations outlined above. Unless exceptions are made by the mayor, all recommendations will take effect upon activation. The mayor should monitor the situation and deactivate to a lower level when appropriate. All actions taken by the mayor regarding level 4 activation or deactivation should be in writing and distributed to the city manager and all department heads without delay. And we should probably put in there the city council as well to distribute that. And then authority, again, this was, I think this was an addition from Lisa. The mayor, after consultation, no, I think I actually put that in. The mayor, after consultation, if practicable, with high-level staff and council members, is authorized to determine and designate level 4 incidents. And then we put a clause in there about OSHA requirements, because we wanted to make sure that we were going to follow proper OSHA procedures. We've been trying to nail that down, but you know how that is. It's massive amount of stuff. So we just wanted to put in there that, hey, we're going to follow OSHA's as they apply. So we talk about employee leave there. I think this is a lot of Lisa's entries here, and employee travel. So Lisa, maybe you, because you've worked on that portion of it more than I have.
Sure. I thought it would be helpful to spell out a little bit on, because we were talking about whether employees should be allowed to travel, and I think some more information has come out that we're not really able from a legal standpoint to say you can't travel somewhere. But if you do, you're going to be subject potentially to some quarantine. You know, like if you decide you want to go to a restricted area, then I wanted to make it clear that, you know, if you're quarantined and you can't do teleworking, then that might be using your own additional vacation leave and things like that. We have put in the policy, however, though, that at each level, you know, well, starting at level 1, you know, employees should reconsider travel just on a voluntary basis. But as we get further and further along and into the level 4, we do have provisions that say department heads and city manager are going to, you know, determine available leave.
Going to use the example.
Mm-hmm.
So the example of that is we did have an employee who was going to go to Disneyland on spring break. Now, I consider that a level 4 country to begin with, but So again, I'm not going to restrict that employee from going to Disneyland. However, I did say, look, if you go to Disneyland, you will be on quarantine for 14 days. And this is prior to any declarations even being made, just taking some precautions. I think we'd be at level 2, I think, at this point when this was mentioned. And luckily, Disneyland is shut down as well, so that employee's not going to Disneyland. But that was the example that came up saying, we are going to quarantine you. You can work from home. I'll work with you on that. So go have fun at Disneyland. Stay home. I don't want to see you. So.
But I do think the city, so for instance, department heads already have some level of authority on vacations. You know, people have to ask, we have a leave policy that says you have to ask for it, and there has to be appropriate staffing. So if everybody comes in and asks for, you know, a vacation, I do think we have some authority on that to say, hey, we want to restrict it. But from what I've researched, I think it's problematic to just prohibit any personal travel. But there will be potentially additional use of leave, and it has to fit into, you know, the business working so that we can be staffed. And then I wanted to put in, and it's not ideal to have some of these leave and travel provisions in the infectious disease plan, but just given the time, I think this is probably where we'll put it, but also explaining to employees when and how they'll be paid. So again, if you're sick, you're going to use sick leave. If you're home taking care of a sick family member, you can use some long-term sick leave perhaps, or, you know, if it qualifies for family medical leave, those sorts of things, but our regular policies will be in place. If you're on vacation, and we explained this to the employees, at least here at City Hall yesterday or Friday, you know, if you're on vacation during this time, you're going to use vacation time. If you're authorized, we're going to specifically authorize people to telework when it's appropriate. And if you're authorized to telework, you know, obviously you'll be paid during that time that you're working. Also, we've reserved here the right to say, hey, if you're exhibiting some symptoms, you need to go home. That'll be sick leave. But if we as an employer say, we'd like you to go home even though you're not exhibiting any symptoms, and you can't telework, then in that situation, at least the way it's drafted now, is that the city manager will determine those employees that are eligible to be on paid administrative leave, rather than just saying we're sending you home without pay. Now, if we shut down operations completely, then maybe that's not a paid situation, but obviously we'll have to continue to make those decisions. So this was just an idea to at least have something for the employees, because this is the first thing they're going to be thinking about. Am I getting paid? You know, and can I still go on vacation? So anyway, that was the intent to add these latter 2 paragraphs. And
So let me kind of back up a little bit. So as this developed, and it seemed to be getting more serious over time, it became a more serious discussion during our executive team meetings, and the mayor became concerned and called Brant and I in to do some talking about it. Now, initially, again, we were in that phase where we're thinking, do we want to create panic? Is this as big a deal as, you know, some people are saying and some people are not saying? And, you know, we're kind of in that fuzzy area where we don't know what's going on for sure. As we move along and it's looking more serious, discussions are intensifying. Last Tuesday we had our executive team meeting. Brant joined by phone. It was last Tuesday, wasn't it? Yeah. So it gets to be a blur. The fire chief was there.
I was there. I was in that room.
We had.
I was there.
So some serious discussion was going on during that meeting as far as, hey, we got to take this serious. We got to make sure we're intensifying our cleaning, and that's been a topic with Kimber for weeks now. Getting supplies. Probably 3 weeks ago, as a police department, we ordered almost $900 worth of supplies, masks, gloves, and hand cleaner, hand sanitizer. So it was probably about 3 weeks ago that we did that. And looking at our supplies and our you know, what we got on hand. So Tuesday we had our executive team meeting. Wednesday I went to the Northern Region meeting. Thursday we had, what did I have at Thursday?
Thursday, you met with me for 45 minutes, and whatever you did before or after that.
Okay.
the
Thursday
governor's
was
press
spent, we spent a lot of time on this plan.
I think you were, yeah, here a lot.
On Thursday, I was dealing with a very serious personnel issue during all this time. And then on Friday, who called that meeting? Did you call that, Brent? I forget who called the meeting. Anyway, we had a meeting on Friday
To
with the,
respond to the governor's press conference.
that's what it was, yeah. So we had the press conference, we had President Trump's declaration, and everybody's going to the grocery store, and we're seeing empty shelves everywhere. I mean, it's getting real. And so on Friday, we had a meeting again. We wanted to come up with a course of action, looking at this plan and seeing what we should implement now, and then talking about bringing it before the council on Tuesday, talking a lot about the Tuesday meeting with council. And Mayor, were you in that meeting?
It was,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
You and I and Lisa set it up and brought in Brent and Alex was there.
yeah,
as well,
yeah,
too.
that's right. So that's where we really started getting the gears rolling on as far as, oh, let me back up to Thursday. So Thursday, we had court. And,
Have things been washed since then?
yeah, they should have been. So Thursday, well, and while I'm on that topic, assume they're not washed. So everybody just assume they're not washed. Carry around your own hand sanitizers. Sanitize yourself often. Be careful how you open the doors. Use your elbow, you know. Everybody's got to take personal responsibility for that. So Thursday we had court, and the judge was extremely concerned. And I had a conference with him. I met with him as court was getting started. And he was expressing his concerns, and I don't know what the regulations are in the court was, and I don't think it hadn't come out yet from, and so everybody's like, we don't know what we should do, including the judge, as far as whether we should have court. And I said, well, Judge, it's your court. If you say no, then it's a no. But I said, if you want to run the court, let's do this. Let's separate people 6 feet apart. Let's do a handout to everybody in the court and give it to people as they're coming in with the symptoms of COVID-19. And if anybody was expressing those symptoms, we would ask them to go to the window and request a continuance, which would be given. And so, and the judge sits up there, he's got a distance away from people, so we instituted those mitigation measures for court.
Is that handout in English and Spanish?
No, that's a good point, we didn't do that in Spanish, yeah. Yeah. Glad you brought that up. We need to remember to do that. And also on some of the stuff, like if we have a press conference, or even, we talked with the mayor about doing a YouTube, this was Brant's idea, doing a YouTube address to the citizens and putting it out there. Maybe we ought to look at getting an interpreter for that.
ASL?
Yeah. Because I think that is required. So anyway, things were ratcheting up pretty fast. And so we had the meeting on Friday, and then after the meeting, we met with all of the department heads and went to the different departments and gave them a heads up on there was going to be some changes coming on Monday. We felt like it was important to get the ball rolling because this thing is a moving target. It's been happening. It's evolving so fast. And then on Tuesday, come before the council and present it. Again, this has been a document that it continues to be in development. And so we wanted to try to get something to you that was somewhat getting closer to finish. So I think that's where I'm at. That's great.
So after meeting with the chief, and I had to be here to sign a couple checks as well too, with Brand out of the office and some others, but I peeked my head in and the judge was pretty concerned. And I told him, you can just use the court if you want. But I think the courts have since got some guidance, haven't they?
Yeah, so on Friday, the Judicial Council and the Utah Supreme Court sent out an administrative order and did clarify. I mean, they said we want to have a uniform policy for all the courts within the state, from the Supreme Court down to the justice courts and juvenile courts. And they did make it clear in that order that the courts do still need to be operational. So the judge, after Thursday, our Judge Miller had sent out his internal plan, but we'll be working with the judge to make sure that the plan that we came out with before the administrative order complies with that. But luckily, the court does have that glass, and so the approach is that we will probably still have access to the court through that glass, but many items will be continued, over the coming weeks. Which is, no, well, the glass, if you just go in that foyer.
Court.
Yeah, right, that will be used. We will not be having a public setting, so the judge may do necessary court items through that window. But again, we'll be reviewing that court order, the administrative order, to make sure. But again, our justice court does need to be continued operations, even if City Hall is closed. So that was pretty clear.
So one other aspect that I wanted to bring up, an element to this, has to do with the incident command system, is the public information component of it. And in our meeting on Friday, this was something that we needed to determine, as far as we needed to start working on messaging to get to our community. The hesitancy about putting something out other than just sharing information was, we're not the authority. And so we wanted to be solid on what we're putting out. So in that meeting, we decided that I would put Alex in charge of, she would be the PIO. Now, that doesn't mean that she's the one in front of a camera or whatever, but would be a support to whoever would be in front of the camera. And typically, in a situation like this, it should be the mayor that's in front of the camera, or the one being interviewed, because it needs to be of that high level of authority. It's like if there's a shooting in, officer-involved shooting, I'm going to probably have a PIO do some initial stuff, but ultimately I'm going to have to be, my face is going to have to be on camera. So that was the direction we gave. Alex has been through PIO training. So her job was to start working on some messaging information that we could put out. And we decided we needed to get some kind of, put together a letter or some information. I think it kind of morphed into a letter, but some kind of information that we could give the public and give people. So that was a work in process, and I had to make a quick run down to St. George yesterday. Brant's been laid up. So we have been working through phone and text messaging, and my wife texting for me while I'm driving on this, and Lisa was involved with that as well. No, you weren't. You weren't involved. Sorry. But Brant and I, and then the mayor became involved, I believe, right? Weren't you involved with that or not?
I was involved as far as, well, you brought me in as far as getting together and putting the YouTube video together.
Oh,
right?
yeah, okay. So it was mainly Brant,
Yeah, on Friday.
Brant, Alex, and me.
Yeah.
And we were going back and forth. She developed a draft. I looked at it, made changes, sent it back to her. She sent it to Brant. Brant made some changes, so we were going back and forth on this thing, and finally came up with that. We actually were trying to contact you Saturday, was having a hard time finding you, but we decided our goal was to try to get that out about noon, and but it didn't go out till I think almost 3 or so, but and that's when I told Alex we need to send it out to the council and to the neighborhood network and try to get those messaging out. So I apologize for that. It's just was a moving target and something we were trying to get moving. So
Just to clarify, that's the limited city services memo that was posted to the Facebook pages and things like that, for kind of outlining the duties and responsibilities. I don't see a significant disruption in city services at all. It's just the way we're doing business is just going to be a little different. We're going to have not as many staff here, and that's not in an intent to, it's just to avoid as many people at City Hall as possible. But that's going to be a moving target in itself over the next week or so as we try to determine who should or shouldn't be here. And you're going to have hybrids like myself, who I might be out a couple of days, but in here most of the time because of signing documents and just overseeing operations. Leah, we've talked about as well. Leah can do a lot of her work from home, but she's going to need to come in 1 or 2 days a week. Lisa, there's going to be a lot of hybrids, so we're trying to. We really don't have clear direction from department heads at this point. So Monday, we have a meeting scheduled with department heads. This will be our last face-to-face meeting for the next month or so. We'll have maybe phone calls after that, but where we're really going to narrow down what are we doing with our staff going forward, and we'll present that on Tuesday of those decisions being made, just so you have an understanding of what the operations will be like. But as stated in the letter, we'll have everybody go to court since we have a window there. Those are the benefits of having windows, by the way. Leah and I always, when we're working with public, sometimes you love those windows. But we'll be using court, so we'll have a city administration person staffed over there along with a court person, but we'll still have city administration people over here that can reply to calls. We'll have a phone out here in the lobby that if you do need to call someone, there'll be a phone there that will be cleaned regularly. But we'd prefer people use their own cell phones if they call, which is on that letter, right, that we will post near the phone. So we don't see significant disruptions in providing services. Our big concern for me is still our common areas. Public Works, they are out in the field. They're alone generally. They're doing their job, but they do come back to the break room. They do come back to the office and touching those things. So we're hoping to increase the hours of our custodial staff just to be able to come in and help out a little bit more. We have started to track our expenses as of right now, whether or not we do file for any reimbursement or funding from FEMA. Jolene, we'll ask her to do that. Did we ask Jolene to do that on Friday? Did we?
I don't know the message
She
ever
wasn't in
got.
on Friday.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
She's
she
not in on
wasn't.
Friday. So Jolene's not aware, but she is fully capable. We had a conversation about the 2011 windstorm, and she was actually FEMA, according to her, that she shared with, just loved that she had it under control. So we'll ask Jolene to run with that again. Is there anything else I need to talk about at that point?
So once we do have, excuse me, once we do have basically a declared emergency, it pretty much invokes our emergency operation plan, the structure of that, and it allows us to do it opens up some flexibility on things. I just wanted to go over what, and we can get you a copy of the emergency operation plan, continuity of operations, and who's basically in charge, and the succession and so forth, and that's all also dictated by state law. But with that in place, and we've enacted our emergency operation plan officially, then the mayor, city council is part of our policy group. So I'll just read through the members of our policy groups: city manager, assistant city manager, mayor, police chief, public works director, emergency management director, same thing, citizen attorney, city council, and public information officer. So there's this designation of a policy group to help kind of make some upper level policies on a response to an incident without getting into the minutia. So a policy would have to do with what services are most important to the city. Some overarching directives without getting into the individual decision-making, and in the weeds below. So
I think Kimber's getting blitzed from all angles. Chief's been talking to him. I'm sure Brand's been talking to him. Then I called him up and had him call me as well too, about wiping everything down. So we're not going to be using the city as much with as many people here, but we're making sure that he has the help that he needs if he needs any help, aren't we?
Correct. We have 2 part-timers also on staff that work on nights that help subsidize Kimber, so we can ask them to spend a few more hours here at City Hall and Public Works Building.
Yeah. And I apologize for yesterday. My phone was sitting in a locker for about a 4-hour period, where you imagine where that phone was sitting during that time. So and you're not supposed to take the phone with you. But other than that, I'll be available all other times, and I have been this week. So apologize for that yesterday, brief.
We can't leave you voicemail. Your voicemail's not set up.
Okay, I'll fix that then.
He's done that intentionally. From all of us, so does the city manager.
Unless you have
Is
more
that a
questions,
city phone? Just kidding.
unless you have more questions for me, I'll turn the time over to someone else.
Chief, I was going to say, from an administrative policy built on the fly in the midst of the ever-evolving situation, this is fantastic work.
Thank you.
Yes, it is, Chief. We've been telling him that all week. And Alex has worked hard on it as well too, and Lisa. I hate to
been a
throw out
team
names
effort.
because there's been a lot of
Yeah.
people involved. You know, and I know Brand's been constantly with the chief on the phone as well too. So everybody has. So thank you.
At this point, I'd like to motion that we go into a closed session to discuss security concerns and planning with no intent to return to the regular city council meeting.
Before you do that, can I ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
So, are you saying we're at 4 versus 3 at this point?
From a practical point of view, I think we're at 4. It hasn't been declared by the mayor as of yet, if this plan is in operation.
Is the state, I don't know if the state is totally reflected, is the state at 3 or 4?
So the state has a,
My question is we're at 3.
yeah, so the state has a different activation names, and there's 5 or 6 categories. They're next to the highest. So full activation. They may be at full activation now, I don't know, but there's a variety of levels, and it has to do with the activation of their EOP and the activation of their Emergency Operations Center and all of the functions. So they're at the next to the highest right now, at least the last time I checked.
So Bill,
Probably hasn't gone down.
well, I need to go check myself, but in terms of the cases we've had, those are all what are referred to as transport cases, so that means they brought it in with them. We've just had our first local, they call them community or cases.
Community spread.
So, yeah, that's happened, which was inevitable anyway,
Yeah,
but
it
that
was
changes the dynamic. That's kind of a start of this whole.
So Chief and I, if I could share with you, we've kind of, I shouldn't say resisted. We kind of have though, and in terms of, we didn't want to overreact. We want to be methodical and measured in our response. And so we had that meeting with the mayor. I think both of us kind of felt, look, Mayor, yeah, we get this should be a concern. We're still concerned more about the flu. Councilmember Ince had shared at one of our emergency management meetings the concern about this COVID-19, which again was calculated. So there's just been a lot of information, but after that meeting that we had with the mayor, the chief and I sat down a little bit more. We had the declaration of the governor and all sorts of new information that we kind of changed. And we kind of feel pushed in going to a certain direction by our state officials. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if we're not on the same page with our state, this is completely ineffective, and we're not going to be smart about this. So there's a way we're kind of okay at that point, overreacting, if we can call it that. I don't know if we really are overreacting. I think we're just trying to be prepared, and we all need to be on the same page, and we need to take our direction from the state. So I think our tune has changed, and our position on declaring a state of emergency has changed as well, because we were resisting that initially based on some incorrect information. Now that we have a better understanding, we would actually propose that to occur on Tuesday night with the possibility of creating that proclamation on Monday and including that in the packet for Tuesday. What it does is we have access to the FEMA funding already through the state declaration. However, we really do need to streamline our operations and our procedures, which a state of emergency, us declaring it, allows us to have access to that through the state statute. So we would recommend that occur. And that will be added to the agenda for Tuesday. If that needs to be decided by this body, in fact, before we go into closed session, there's a number of things that I would like to discuss. Number one is that somewhere where we want to go? Number two, upcoming city events and what we should do with those. Leah has been tasked with compiling all of our upcoming city events through the end of April. I think through the end of April is a good timeline. You have a number of agencies going through the end of May. I think April we should look at. We're not talking about 4th of July. We're not talking about any of that right now. I think those preparations still be ongoing, but how they meet is different. And then also these city council meetings, our planning commission meetings, are any of our other boards and commissions, how should they be meeting? Should we do once a month? Should we alter, as Lisa has put on the agenda, altering our electronic meetings briefly just to change that so maybe many people could participate from home? Those are questions I do have for you to give us direction on what you want to do with those. So the first one is declaring a state of emergency at this level.
I would think that given that the situation has evolved and there will probably be some more press conferences tomorrow, I would prefer to see where the state's going before we got there.
We'll leave it on the agenda. We'll prepare it, and then you can make a decision on that based on the information, whatever we hear tomorrow. Does that work on that one? Now, the events that we have upcoming is Easter egg hunt. I think we should absolutely cancel the Easter egg hunt. But what are some of the other ones, Leah?
Can I make, as we're talking about that,
Please.
can I make one comment first? One of the things that to me is particularly significant in this area is doing cancellations in such a way that the people who are supporting it haven't already spent their money and made their effort. So I would agree with that on the Easter egg hunt, and I think one of the things that's a real tragedy is, particularly because of some people that I'm involved with close to the cancellation of the Houston Stock Show and Rodeo. You know, all of the little people have spent all their money and made all their investment, and they're screwed.
Yeah, that's tough.
And so to the extent, and we don't have anything like that, I recognize, but to the extent possible, canceling things early enough that people haven't made the effort, to me, is important.
Well, I suggested on
agree.
Friday, and
That's a
Lisa,
good point.
Lisa Summers was going to have youth council together on this past Saturday to stuff eggs, and I said, no, at this point in time, I don't see that we'd be doing the Easter egg hunt, so.
I'd recommend that the youth city council not meet at all. There's no practical purpose in having them.
Yeah, and they did not meet Saturday, yeah, they
I
did
don't
not
think
meet
that the youth
Saturday.
council should be meeting during this. Let's not give anybody anything we don't
Well,
want.
and you mentioned it, Brand, a minute ago, other committee meetings. If they can do them by telephone, fine, but tree board, for example, which I'm on, I think it can be put on hold. We've gone 25 years without it. Postponing things for 60 days works. I'm not much sure about planning commission.
I think planning and city council need to maintain continuity of government, but any other committee should be suspended.
But I think we shouldn't have any public hearings.
That was an interesting question that came up from the city manager in Draper, who was asking about that and what do you do with public hearings. And I actually I played back with what we did with our public hearing with the DeVore property, in that you could open a public hearing here, but you can actually just say, we'd like your requests through email over the next 2 weeks. So I think there is still that option to do public hearing. It's just not a vocal public hearing. You actually request it through different means, because it's, and I just recommended to him the same thing that you guys do as a council, that you all do as a council, and that is we don't vote on the night of a public hearing. You don't need to hear that input. Give it time to simmer and think about it. So,
And maybe not have any public hearings that aren't crucial, I guess,
right.
is more what I'm saying.
We are absolutely, so what you
Obviously,
see,
if we've got, you've got the DeVore property or whatever that somebody's waiting financially on, we need to deal with that, but I would suggest we don't have any.
Yeah.
But I know that the planning commission has several for the Main Street. I think we ought to push those down the road.
agreed,
until-
100% on those ones. Yeah, absolutely, those need to be pushed back. And then Tuesday is actually a scaled back version. We actually had more items on the agenda. So we're only bringing things that are absolutely critical or time sensitive to you. We're going to keep it a reduced agenda, keep it
You can
light.
take me off.
Or that are simple.
So,
Or simple, so.
it's never simple. So from a practical standpoint, can we legally close the gallery if we provide an open conference line and transmit our meetings live? Is that meet the public meetings?
I think there's a question, and so until we hear otherwise, I would say, I mean, the statute says the public has to have access to the meeting. So even if all of you stay home, we probably have to do the 6-foot people coming here. And so that's where I'm saying, I think it's just under the law, going to be easier for you to cancel your meetings. If we don't have anything critical, we don't need to have a meeting. And I'm just saying in the next 2 weeks. I mean, I think you really
I
should
agree
think
with
about
that.
whether the planning commission meeting is necessary when we're just looking at Main Street and the subdivision ordinance. No,
Right.
let's not get people out of their homes and bring them here.
I agree.
But
Canceled via Lisa.
She has spoken.
I concur.
So do we need then to, and is it Brandt or is it the mayor that communicates with all of the committees and says, unless it is something that is really critical,
I think that's Leah.
you're on
Yeah.
hold?
Well,
It's
that's
a
why we've asked,
combination thereof. It
there's
could be any of us.
the three-step protocol on, number one, we want a list of all the meetings and events that we have, either through April or May. Number two, some sort of decision-making tree of which ones we're going to cancel and why, or postpone. And then three, the notification procedure. And so I think we'll just go through that process, and, you know, if we want to talk about it, once we get that list, we can do that, but I think that's something that we can handle administratively. Yeah, and really recommend, again, just in the next 2 weeks is really what I'm
Yeah,
focusing on
and
as well.
it needs
But
to be
knowing,
almost an incremental 2-week.
right, and I think that's what
process.
most entities are doing, is saying, you know, for the next 3 days, or for the next 4 days, or, you know, but that's where I've said, let's just look at the next 2 weeks, because that's what the governor and the state have said, is we want this, you know, 2-week period where we try to really restrict, so.
So just from a practical standpoint, from the state employees, there is no travel allowed outside the state unless otherwise authorized by your boss up until June 1. So they're not booking any aircraft travel, anything like that.
Work-related, or you mean?
Work-related.
So we would,
No.
And
and
I've
I've,
still the same issue with restricting people
and
on
I've
their own
actually kind of
time.
adopted that administratively on my end. The two travels I had upcoming are both canceled through the end of May. And anyway, there's a number of travels that, from an administrative standpoint, I think we need to cancel any work-related travel. Or if they do go, 14-day quarantine goes into effect.
Whereas I agree with let's look at it incrementally. I think we should be looking long-term towards
We ought to be-
anything that's,
I think through the end.
don't set any expectation that things get normal in April or May. That's all I'm saying. We
My
shouldn't
own-
set that at
My own
all.
personal evaluation, what I've told some people is first date you can really look for normalcy is June 1st.
And that's what most agencies are doing through the end of May. You know, my international organization, ICMA, is through the end of May, all things are canceled. A number of agencies have made that the end date, the end of May, and I think that's actually a good, we're saying end of April, because we didn't want to go too far out, but I think realistically, we can say through the end of May, if you want to make that as a policy that we should be looking forward to, based on Councilmember Rentz's idea, we should have enough of a heads up if there's any activities or events, they don't invest any money. But there's also another term that I used in our last meeting as well, is there's a difference between cancel and postpone. And I want to be careful how we use that for particular events. Easter egg canceled, but is there a Whitaker project we can postpone? Right, that we can just reschedule to another date. I use the NBA and NCAA as the examples. NBA postponed, NCAA canceled, which I think is a terrible idea, but.
So at what
That's
point?
that's the other question that I would have too, if we want to discuss before we go into closed session. Just some standard procedures of communicating to the public from the council members.
So
Do we want to discuss that, but some best practices and some approaches that keep things as positive as possible? To your point, there's such a huge difference in the word cancel and postpone, and there are these nuances that we could identify now as a council that we all agree to use universally when talking about this issue with the public on our own social media, et cetera.
Well, I think that might be something to handle another day. What I would suggest is that we come up with this list, and I think Leah is going through the end of May. The priority is to get through April, but obviously we'll just continue to map those out and decide. But I think it's probably up to, you know, I'm certainly fine bringing things back to the council, like Easter egg or, you know, some of these and say, okay, looking out, which ones do you want to cancel or postpone? But, yeah, I think that's part of our internal plan is to come up with reasonable notification and language and also limiting who's speaking to the public. I mean, that's sort of my
I think that's an
preference.
important thing.
And something I
think
tried
that
to
is.
emphasize with employees on Friday is, this isn't your message to distribute. Please allow the city time to distribute this and get it on our websites and, you know, until we have the talking points. And so I think that's a good point, Tammy, to at least have some talking points when we're ready for other people to distribute the message. But as of Friday, I don't think we were ready, so.
Well, the ask I have in that is in any messaging that we do that the elected officials are informed before it goes out. We all have different constituents who are going to come ask us, and if we do have bullet points we can talk about, and that's the extent of what we're talking about, then we're not making weird suppositions or making ourselves experts in areas we're not.
Internal
that doesn't-
internal
I think,
distribution.
Lisa,
Right.
that's my point, is what you just said is, you did talk to staff about recommendations about what to leave to city to communicate what, and so I think that as a council, we would appreciate your opinion on that and some direction starting today. What do you want, I mean, because it is our responsibility to communicate with constituents, and so it's a tricky balance, right? What do we defer to let come from the official city channels versus ourselves?
And to add to that, Tammy, I think we need to be very aware of what is an administrative decision and what's a legislative decision, so that we're
Yes.
not getting ourselves twisted up over, because, for example, this document, this could be implemented without us, and I would not have any beef with that, because this is an appropriate administrative decision that's made under, we'll call it emergency duress. We can ratify this sort of thing later or support it, but this is not our call necessarily to make. So when we come across these situations, I just want to make sure that we've clearly delineated where we stay out of the way and where we add value. So
Thank you.
that's back to Lisa's point, or back to asking Lisa, give us instruction on that at some future date, or today if you feel that you can do that. So one question I have is with the summer rec program, at what point is our trigger point that we have to have a go, no-go on that, especially baseball and those activities that gather large groups of people together?
Well, we talked on Friday, and with baseball was one that was in particular brought up, and we talked about suspend or postpone, whatever term we want to use. I don't know the possibility, we haven't talked to them yet, of doing a shortened season, because we talked about suspending until the end of May. If that's a possibility or not.
There's logistics, use of the fields, timing, things like that would have to be discussed with Matt Layton, Cheyenne, and through Bruce.
When do we do registrations for that?
Registration's ongoing
They're
right
open.
now. But in all, I will share right now that our registration is, as of Friday last week, we were 1/4 our registration levels that we had seen in the prior years, but most of the registration occurs this month.
I would suggest that we come to an administrative policy that if we do cancel, that it's full refund.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
There would be no
yeah.
hesitation
And
about that.
state that while they're registering now.
Now, just keep in mind, we will still maintain the fees. I mean, we'll incur the fees. I don't have an issue with that. I'm just letting you know that from a fiscal standpoint that we will
That's fine.
incur
I
those
don't
fees.
have
But
a
I have no
problem.
issue with a full refund at all.
This goes back to Bill's point. If the little guy is putting in, and they are little guys in this case, putting in money to participate in baseball, and it turns out that we cannot facilitate that, then I think a full refund is appropriate.
Absolutely, we wouldn't hesitate about a full
So
refund.
can I go back to the comment you made a second ago?
Mm-hmm.
Were you saying the volume to date is a quarter what it's been in the past?
As our registration was last year. But again, most of our registrations occur in the month of March.
So he's saying
towards the
total
end.
registration.
Total registration.
But what you're saying is we've received 25% of what we would have received in the same time frame?
No.
No,
A
in
total.
total.
25% of the total, okay. So it's not necessarily.
It's lower than what we expected. It's lower than what we would expect at this point. I don't have a percentage for you on that, but
That's fine. I wanted to understand what you'd said as opposed to.
I have one question on something you said. So you said that you were canceling business trips, city business trips, except if they did go, they'd be on a 14-day quarantine. I'm not sure that we want to take liability of anybody going to one of those conferences So we don't have somebody coming back and going,
So,
I went there for my job and now I've got this.
right.
I don't think
Well,
we should have any going.
we discussed that. Now, so the funny thing is, I'm gonna throw Lisa's group under the bus a little bit. So everybody has essentially canceled their conferences to begin with, particularly the state conferences, but the city attorneys decided to hold on till the very last minute. And so
We really wanted to go.
I think they were really fighting and trying to argue and justify why they're different. I don't know what it was, but
I can't think of a large gathering conference that hasn't canceled. Even the mosquito abatement district canceled, but the meeting place in Portland still wants their $450,000.
you know,
There's a lot of that going on right now.
yes.
Yeah, and I think the way I drafted it, at least in this, is that it's up to depending on what level we're in, it's up to the city manager to decide whether to restrict work travel or prohibit. And so I think that's up to Brant to decide, hopefully, by Monday, okay, we are prohibiting for the next month.
I will say that I am leaning towards restricting it altogether. However, I don't want to throw that extreme statement out there until I have a chance to talk with department heads on Monday to find out there's this one travel that just has to happen, or chief is going to go speak with other emergency managers or something like that. You know what you say? I think there might be those nuances that the one-on-ones might have to be discussed, but ultimately I would say no, you need to cancel it now. And if it's out-of-state travel, the airlines are absolutely working with you through at least the end of April, so you can cancel those trips. Hotels are fairly easy to cancel right now as well, but in-state, generally with the declaration by the governor, most organizations have canceled that I'm aware of, that any of our people to attend. Anyway, so that's kind of where we are.
Unless we have more public questions, I'd motion that we go into a closed session to discuss security.
I do have a couple more questions. Paul, there's a comment in here about not going out to eat
Yeah.
while you're on work. Isn't that contrary to what most of the other public declarations have been done both federally and at the state level?
I don't know about if it's contrary or not. What the language put in there was it's discouraged.
Yeah.
I understand, but because of protecting the small business owners,
So this is for employees, not for citizens.
I understand, but I'm raising the question.
So I'm trying to limit the exposure, for example, my officers have to getting the virus. I know that they're gonna get it, and we need to
Hey, don't say that.
try to spread it out as much as we can. That's the idea, is to smooth the curve out.
What level
But-
do you have that at?
It's only in level 4.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I
That-
mean,
that was kind of part of my, are we at 3, are we at 4?
Yeah.
Because most of the country isn't prohibiting some of those kinds of things, and I'm trying to
Well,
make sure we all
where I'm
understand.
coming from that, from my perspective, looking at my employees, if they go, for example, to a break at some place, some convenience store, and there's a table, and they sit down, and that table
Hasn't been cleaned.
hasn't been cleaned, lots of people have sat there. I think it's just and there's lots of people walking around, a lot of, it's just another risk that maybe we can reduce. Now, it says discouraged. It's not like absolute.
and we hope to
Yeah.
get off level 4 as soon as possible, because, yeah, I can see your point, Councilman Ince, from the standpoint.
I'm just.
We as a city want to support our businesses,
Yeah.
so.
And I don't necessarily think that the officers are going to create a knock-on effect that's going to do that. Frankly, if you talk to business owners already who are in those service industries, they're taking a huge hit. I don't think our officers are going to trigger anything additional.
I went in and out Thursday night at 7:30, and 4 of the 7 larger booth tables were empty.
Their drive-through was still going last night, but,
Drive-through was
yeah.
still pretty strong, but inside it was empty.
Yeah.
I was quite surprised.
That's going to continue to happen.
No, I
yeah.
do understand.
I could see where it might cause pause, but in this particular case, I would prefer to have them isolated and ready to work.
I do too, especially our emergency personnel. I think we want to keep them as healthy as possible. and yet our other staff is very important too, so I think it's a good thing. I mean, I can see where Bill's coming from,
Yeah.
and I mean, I am so sad for the people that are, you know, all of the, there is so many people that are being affected, but I do think we need to keep our city staff as safe as possible. That's not to say they won't go out to dinner at night, but.
Well, and part of this we have to really pay attention to is what we know and what we don't know about this is evolving every day. So I think it would be unrealistic to say this is a forever situation.
Right.
But in the short term, what you don't know can hurt you severely.
We feel right now we're at a level 4, mainly because the state has said for the next 2 weeks, and this fits the state guidelines. Obviously, we hope to be off that level 4 as soon as possible. And so, yeah, and we are saying discouraged that we can't force our employees to do something. I mean, that's the beauty of our country, the freedoms we have, but we can make suggestions.
Yes, we reserve the right to be stupid during a pandemic.
Yeah.
I just want to make one clarification. I know I was recommending canceling the planning commission meeting, but I meant if there wasn't anything critical, like, you know, but if there is an application, I think we need to be sensitive to that. So don't be surprised if we do have the planning commission meeting. It's just if
I
there's
think
not
that's-
anything
I think
critical,
that's extremely
we will
appropriate.
cancel it.
One of the other things I would like to suggest, and sorry, George. to
No, it's fine.
keep
I don't want to
pushing
cut
back.
off public comment type stuff yet.
This weekend particularly, I have seen, I guess it's 3 interviews, disclosures, I don't know what you want to call them, of COVID virus survivors talking about their experience. One of the things that bothers me is when we use the term high mortality rate, at least in my opinion, it causes people to think about 20, 30%, things being extremely critical. And for the most part, people that are using their heads and are in good health are surviving. So one of the things I'd like to do in posting information is get some of these things on the website for people to see.
I would prefer that we just direct them to the CDC or to coronavirus.utah.gov as the
But
authority.
they're
on
not
this.
distributing any of that stuff.
There's a reason they're not distributing that stuff. And so I would prefer that we don't make ourselves an authority on that, because if you look at it practically, when you look at the mortality curve, it goes up past 50, and you go up in age. You know, there are ages that are frankly a death sentence, and that's not a debatable fact if you look at people who are infected in their age groups. But I don't want to necessarily arbitrate that on our website, because we will end up upside down with information that will be evolving and incorrect. It's a practical matter for me. I get where you're at and I agree. Let's calm people where we can, but we have to be careful.
I think calming people is a significant issue at this point.
I
Well-
completely agree.
Calming people is a big significant issue. That's why in putting out this YouTube and Facebook, I formulated in my mind what I was going to say, and it kind of conflicts if we then declare a state of emergency as well too. So,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I wanted to say I couldn't agree with George more, that we just need to refer to official sites in that way for all the exact points that George already stated.
I want to keep people as calm as possible too, but I don't want to set a false expectation either. And I think right now that's being done in a number of places in the country and internationally as well.
I think it's going the other direction.
So do I.
Well, since Spain just basically put everyone on house arrest yesterday, yeah, there's a lot of different responses, even in our own country. Calling out the National Guard to isolate New Rochelle that's pretty extreme.
Yeah.
You didn't hear about that?
I missed that one.
Oh, yeah,
I-
New Rochelle, New York has a National Guard with a 1-mile exclusion ring where they're deconning the schools and providing food services and things like that. The governor called them out to assist in what they looked at as a disease cluster. So
So-
there are varying responses, and some of them cause panic.
So what?
So I've kind of been in that category of we're overreacting. but I've moved away from that with the more information that I've got, and this is the real deal, and it really does kill a lot of people, especially the ones that are at risk and in those age groups. I have a daughter who has asthma. She's high risk. She's 31 years old, or 31, I think. She is high risk. If she gets it, so 80% of the people will be able to recover without a problem at home. 20% are going to need intervention at a hospital. Now, if you look at the numbers and we start infecting hundreds of thousands of people, think about what that's going to do to our hospital system. There are not enough respirators, there are not enough ICU rooms to keep that 20% alive. And my daughter's going to be in that 20% if she gets it. She'll probably need to be in an ICU. So it is real. There really is a situation here that we've got in our face. Yeah, most people are going to have mild case, and it's going to be no big deal for them, but they can give it to someone who it's going to kill. So I think if we end up in May or June and this turns out to be, we look at it and go, oh, that wasn't so bad, it will be because of the implementations that are going on today that is the case. If we don't make these implementations now and we don't limit our gatherings and so on, and we don't take these precautions now, when we hit May or June, we're going to be in this a lot deeper, and it's going to be really bad.
Part of what we're attempting to do is spread this out, because I talked to an executive at IHC on Thursday, and right now they say most of their hospitals' respirators are already used just for regular patients. So that's that 20% that needs to go to the hospital.
Well,
we're trying to spread it out over time.
And you look at the situation, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and so, would you throw me one of those, Lisa?
Passing of water. I see you throw it at.
Prepare heavily, but don't panic, and so.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to, in my mind, avoiding the panic is a real significant thing. It's like the toilet paper issue. I mean, people are being really stupid.
Well, they're not. They just think that the diarrhea follows the flu, and they're not the same. They're not the same symptoms.
No,
I mean, that there is a rationale. It's just not the correct one.
I share your concern, Paul, because my wife's got COPD issues.
Yeah.
So she is staying home. I'm doing all the shopping. I'm doing the going. And yeah, I could expose her if I get in contact with the wrong person.
Well, see, we're all circling around the issue that Tammy already brought up, which is consistent messaging so we don't induce panic. And I think that's something we do have to be very aware of in yielding to a higher authority when it comes to information. And as far as from my perspective, if we are putting out communications, as long as we're aware of them beforehand and don't go off script, at least we're consistent.
Only one other thing I wanted to say for the record is to thank Alex for all of the work that she's been doing to help us out with this. So
Thank you very much.
thank you, Alex.
So can we task, Leah, you're going to have thank you, Alex, I didn't mean to skip over that. Thank you so much. Can we task Leah to, you'll have this list for us on Tuesday, right? It
should be done by Monday.
Okay. And can we also make sure if we don't come up with a message right now that we're going to be consistent, and maybe we will after we do a closed session, I don't know, or come back.
I don't know that we necessarily will be. That's public information we'll want to talk about.
But I think by at least Tuesday we need to have our message of consistency that's coming out from all of us. So
Well, I think Mayor, the YouTube video that Alex will discuss with you after this, right, that should be somewhat of the consistent messaging as of right now. Of whatever, that message in itself of what's on YouTube kind of dictates where that message goes at this point. Doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to change tomorrow or the next day, but at least that should, I don't know what Alex has in mind for the YouTube as right. I haven't seen
So
that.
is this one that the mayor's going to do, or
Yeah.
is this one that is
Yes.
already done and we can
No,
see?
the mayor will be coordinating with Alex shortly after this meeting to discuss the messaging and when to post it, and things like that, so.
Okay, anything else before we,
So are you gonna share, are you gonna share with us what you're recommending that he say?
Once you have the script, can you shoot it to us?
We don't have the script yet.
Once you have the script?
Yeah, once I have the script,
Perfect.
yes, I will share it. Before it goes out. The mayor, like, this is an initial phase of this video right now. So, like I said, this is just initial phases. That's why the mayor and I need to meet and talk about it. So we're not, nothing is
So you're not planning to
happening.
release it today?
No.
no.
The only thing we planned on releasing at this point was that limited city services memo at this point, and then once we were, the discussion of the emergency response plan, I don't know how or where we want to release that until Tuesday, or if we want to, we haven't talked about that since this meeting was impromptu.
But Alex, I was, initially yesterday, we were gonna get together, then this came up, so we didn't. I do want to release that as soon as possible, because
Yes, of course.
starting tomorrow, I mean, we have different personnel policies here at City Hall. If people are coming into the building and whatever else, so.
Okay. And does, I mean, when you and I talked, it was just, you had said you'd come up with some stuff that you wanted to make remarks on. And so he was gonna share that with me today.
Okay.
Yeah, I had some thoughts along the lines of what the chief has put together here, obviously, and what we were implementing within
Okay.
the city.
And
Yeah, I wasn't expanded beyond that scope.
the ask I have is any signage we're doing, let's make it very clear and very large, because the people who are going to come into City Hall, as a generalization, are those who are not going to see YouTube or social media.
Yeah.
They may not even be on Facebook.
Yeah, we're planning on putting up a big A-frame sign right out here in the lobby with a sign attached to it. So it'll be, it'll stand, this tall, 4 feet tall or so, with information on there. So it's.
Perfect.
Yeah, I almost have to walk right over it to get in.
So Paul, you said earlier, we've got 2 flu deaths this year
From the regular
for the
flu.
regular flu.
Yeah.
The young woman who died so quickly, is that one of those 2?
So, the 30-year-old female, yes.
And do you think that 2 is pretty comprehensive, or are there likely others that you wouldn't know about?
That's what we've got back from the ME so far. I think that's it.
Seems a little low based on
That's-
other years and everything.
yeah.
I think we looked at, there might have been some complications from the flu, but really they passed from or there was flu-like
Yeah, there's-
symptoms, but there was complications of
We're-
other
we're-
things that
We're
might have
getting into
played.
the HIPAA area.
We are getting.
Yeah.
into
We are in the HIPAA area here. So,
I'm not looking for names, I'm just looking for
well, no, but,
thought process.
yeah, I'm just saying we've got to be very careful
Yeah,
in that
no,
regard.
Sure.
Because you can't locate a disease down to less than a county level, otherwise you're having a violation of HIPAA.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In this case, where the reason you're hearing about Summit County, but you're not hearing the town, same thing with our Davis County, you don't know the town, that's because by federal law, we can't go lower than that.
But we do know KSL told us it was queso.
Just telling you, I live this stuff every day, that's why it is what it
We'll
is.
leave that topic alone.
Okay. One other curiosity, how many of us know someone who's in quarantine right now?
I don't know anybody. I
I'm
don't.
sorry, George, if that, I'm curious, I want to know how,
Just don't say they live in Centerville if you, yeah.
I didn't say that, how many of us know someone in quarantine?
In official quarantine or in
Self-imposed.
isolation
Either.
to avoid it?
I'd really like 14 days off from work self-imposed. I know a few of those.
So, but, I don't know.
I was curious,
Yeah.
because
But I
told
do
Paul
think
about one last night.
that we're in the very early stages of this. We just started seeing community spread. So the statistics that we're seeing is that one person who's infected with it will infect 6 other people. So you can see the math on that can add up pretty fast. Unless, measures are taken.
So I'm ready to motion for a closed session to discuss considered
Second.
planning with no intent to return to the regular city council meeting.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Council's closed.
And so was that motion for the security reasons?
For
So that is one of the
Yes.
reasons we don't have
Which
to
means we don't record it.
record.
That one's
If we
new.
stick to the topic.